Good evening, everyone. My name is Vikas Pota, and this live stream takes place from a very rainy London. And, we had quite a week last week with World Education Week, which many of you attended, and I want to say thank you to you for that. Hosting 100 events online during the week in partnership with schools from all over the world was pretty ambitious, but so we achieved that. And we also had a fantastic response by way of tickets booked. Over 111,000 tickets were booked last week for these events, which I think is just fantastic. So that support is much appreciated. As part of an effort to bring live conversation with really esteemed people, experts, leaders from the world of education. What we've done is we've curated a group of friends who take part in these live stream discussions. You'll be aware that recently I was asked to join the high-level steering group for the Education Outcomes Fund, and there was a lot of interest in terms of what it was, who what do they do, who is behind it, and so today I thought I'd take the opportunity to invite Amel Karboul, who is the chief executive of the Education Outcomes Fund, to speak to us a little bit about the innovation that's taking place in the financing of education aid in particular. And so please welcome Amel to this live stream. Amel, hi.
Hi, good evening. Hi.
And so for our viewers and participants, tell them a little bit about where you are and what the Education Outcomes Fund is.
Yeah. So we are very, very humbled and proud to have you, Vika, as part of our high-level steering.
You're very
kind. That's fantastic. So the Education Outcomes Fund is an ambitious initiative that basically aims to drastically improve learning and employment outcomes for 10 million children and youth, to start with. How do we do that? It's a partnership with governments, donors, implementing partners, investors, to achieve very measurable outcomes. And basically the funding at the end is tied also to the achievement of these outcomes. So for those who technically are familiar with results-based financing, you can say we're scaling results-based financing in education
So if I stop you for a second, so because the audience doesn't necessarily come from an international development or aid kind of background, they're largely educators and professionals in that sector. What is the traditional way of doing it, and how does it differ from that? So if you can explain that.
Yeah. So traditionally, we pay for activities or inputs. We pay for school buildings, we pay for textbooks, etc. And then basically we measure sometimes. I say sometimes because we have to understand, I think almost half of the countries in the world don't have any standardized assessment of learning in various levels of education. But that's not just the problem, because the other piece is what we're seeing is also there is a lot of money that is wasted. I give you two very quick examples. We were in northern Ghana visiting school, and then suddenly outside of the school, you have these 3 massive toilet blocks, And then when we ask the head teacher, why do you have 3 massive toilet blocks? And while you've just, 15 minutes earlier complained that you didn't have furniture and you didn't have doors and animals would come overnight and destroy stuff. And she's like, when I came, there were 2 toilet blocks. Then there was an NGO who came and they said, oh, we have some money for infrastructure for the school. And she's great, I need a door and furniture. And then the NGO said, no, sorry, because there is evidence in whatever capital of the world that show that toilet blocks help girls stay in school. Our money is tied to building toilet blocks. So now she had 3 toilet blocks, but still no doors and no furniture. And that happens, I think people working on the ground see this often. Another example is a $70 million project that paid for textbooks that was deemed as done. This is when you pay for activity. Textbooks are all the schools. You go 2 years later and you found the textbook in the cupboard of the headmaster's never used. Now, the question we ask ourselves is, how would that look if we paid the $70 million to say, for a certain number of children to be able to read and write, And so you may need textbooks, but you may need also other things. you may need technology, but you may need to train teachers to use the technology and help them, support them how to, so it's kind of, it brings a holistic approach and also a very contextualized approach, because education, and if we have a lot of teachers here, with all my respect, and I think every parent during COVID learned to respect teacher as professionals. It's not something that everyone can do. It's some schools you need to take care more of community and parent engagement, and another you need to support teachers with tool, and a third one maybe a combination of toilet blocks so that girls can come, and maybe school feeding. It's so we are not telling people what to do, because we trust people on the ground know what needs to be done. We're holding them accountable for the outcome, for the results, and that actually puts government spending, aid spending, philanthropic spending on its head, to be honest.
And so when an NGO goes and puts up, for example, this toilet block, they work with that school, and there's that direct interconnection between them. So who do you connect to in terms of as a funder? Who are the people that are involved in setting up a results-based scenario?
So we work mainly with governments, yeah? So let's say our first two projects are in Ghana and Sierra Leone, and we have a long pipeline all over the world now, is we sit together with the president and then the Minister of Education, and we discuss with them the strategy. So in an ideal world, the Minister of Education would have a strategy for their country, what they want to achieve. And then basically, we are also humble about our role, because a big part of that strategy will be met through through what they're doing anyway. It's the government's job, it's a public good, to take care of of the children and the young people. And then there is a niche where we feel, in education is called non-state actors, but these could be non-profits, civil society organizations, social enterprises, can play a role to support governments. And interestingly, COVID actually supported that, because even governments which had a bit of a, kind of a enemy, conflictual, relationship with NGOs, now over COVID, many kind of reached out and created partnership. But back to our model, so we work with governments and say, especially in early childhood and skills, but also in some pockets of basic education, out of school children, learning improvements when you've been spending money and haven't seen results and things like that. We discuss with government what they want to achieve in places where they see a value to bring those partners in. And then we discuss the price, what would be a price for such an outcome. And then there is an RFP process, or request for proposal, and an open bid, where social enterprises, NGOs, nonprofits can bid and say, okay, I can help you to, move girls from primary, secondary, and for them to stay there, because we know that this is a place where they drop off, or although for young people to go through a skill training, but then be employed, not just have a skill training, to be placed and retention in a job, or for children at the end of primary school to be able to read and write. And so we are very government-led, and everyone comes into this partnership.
And so, there's often, because it's a new way of doing things, you will have people who express concerns. So, for example, like, in the FT piece that Andrew Jack has just written, a few people have said that, for example, education is a long-term thing, that you measure it over a period of time, because that is the process of education. That's one concern, that you are too targeted, or the movement is too targeted on trying to get certain types of results. And the second is to do with the introduction of private capital and philanthropy to subvert democracy and government. To speak a little bit about these things and how you square these concerns off.
Yeah, I think the first you talked about comes normally combined with another one, which is like, okay, teacher will teach through the test, or will only work with the most, with, it's called cream skimming, I think, in the jargon, but like, taking the children that are closest to a threshold, etc. So this one you can design badly. You can, if you pay for outcomes, you can create unintended consequences, obviously, but we can solve through design, So we didn't only speak with best practices, we also spoke with worst practices, to be honest, and to learn how can we avoid these unintended consequences. And there are models how you can avoid. You don't pay for a threshold, you pay for improvement. You, for example, can pay more for girls, you can pay more for marginalized children, you can pay more for children who are further away, so you incentivize. So the way you design this, you can change. The other concern, as you said, is like, oh, is this too focused? Look, I'm all for creative thinking and critical thinking and all these things. But a child that cannot read, they cannot also critical think about things, you know? So in a way, there are some basics that we need to achieve. So that's really important. But if you look at our work in early childhood or skills, we say a child that is school ready by 5, there is nutrition, there is health. If we talk about skills, we don't say they have a skill, we say they are employed and they are in that employment for a certain time. So actually it encourages more the holistic view. And the last concern about the private sector. So because basically when you pay for outcomes, for the people who maybe still struggling with the model, when you pay for results when they're achieved, you have a need for pre-finance, because who's going to pay for everything until you achieve that? And so that's where we take private money and money from investors. But I would say it's the opposite for me. It's not the private money that is telling government what to do. It's for once, it's the opposite. It's government telling the private money what to do. You know, the government say, I want these 100,000 children who are out of school in the northern rural area to be back to school. You know, I'll pay when the outcomes are achieved. I'm looking for private money to pre-finance my work. It's like they're saying, I want this bridge, which governments could do more or less well. You know, I want this bridge, I want this road, I want this airport, and you'll pay for it. Now they're getting, I want this, and you'll pre-finance it and take the risk of implementation. So basically, it's governments in the lead here.
And so, you know, it's great to hear about the development of a new way of doing things. You know, you're about to hit the ground running. Where will your first program be? Tell everyone.
Yeah. So the first program is in Ghana, which is in a cooperation also with the government of Ghana, obviously, but World Bank also. We are targeting 2 targets groups. So one, we'll reach 70,000 children who are today out of school. They will go through a remedial, up to 9-month program, and then are integrated into the state school, in the public school. And the second piece, a further 100,000 who are in school but not learning, to support them to be learning over actually quite a few years. And the program will also measure learning after 2 years and after 4 years. So we believe you can't fix, probably 4 years is also short for education, but at least, 4 to 5 years we feel is longer than most programs have been so far.
And so once Ghana is up and running, what is the appetite for doing more?
Actually, look, we have, I think, proven some people wrong on few fronts. So one, they said, oh, what you're doing is very complex, and governments won't have a big appetite for it. It's completely the opposite. We are kind of run over by governments who want to implement this, who want to do this, because they're so aware that in education we may have solved the access, for many children, but they are aware they're not achieving learning, or creating young people who are unemployed after their education. So they're aware they need to do something differently. And they're really open, much more open to this concept than maybe we self-solved. So that's the good news. The other piece which we proved people wrong is they said, okay, let's assume you have people who will pay for these outcomes. You have government interested. Who is the crazy private investor who will come in a poor country somewhere and put the money at risk to implement a solution and lose their money if the outcomes is not achieved in such a complex, environment like education, where many things can go wrong? And actually we proved them wrong too, like in our expression of interest, both in Ghana and Sierra Leone, where Sierra Leone, a country that just came out of Ebola, civil war, fragile, low economy, but when an amazing Minister of Education is super driven and really wants to change things, we are 3 times oversubscribed. We're talking real money here, so from investors and providers who are willing to take the risk. So that's the second piece where we proved people wrong. I think where we did not prove people wrong is that the mindset shift of doing this, especially for donors, has been massive. And also for governments, in a way, governments and donors and aid money is used to kind of shuffle money out of the way in a certain time period. And these things where at the end of the budget cycle, people have to spend the money and things like that. But to tell them actually, no, we don't want you to spend your money. give it to me in 3 years once I achieve this outcome. It's a complete mindset shift. Actually, it's amazing for taxpayers and for effectiveness of aid spending. Is just this mindset shift we're still working on. And we're very grateful actually for the UK government. So good news for once from the UK government that FCDO, now the Foreign Office and Development Office, have been really a trailblazer in this, and they are pushing for this and have been an amazing supporter. Yeah.
And so, Amel, one of the things that happened when you very kindly invited me to your high-level steering group was that I had quite a few NGO leaders from around the world actually write to me and saying, well, how do we access the EOF's programs, right, as an implementer? What advice do you have for them?
Look, I mean, because we're government-led, obviously, they could access our programs in the governments we work with. But if I had an advice for them independently of EOF, I would tell them, fine, do one program. I know it's in English it's called social impact bond, which I know I don't like the word because it's not a bond. The French call it social impact contract. So there are different words for this. It's this form of partnership. I would tell them do one deal, because I love the example of Educate Girls in Rajasthan. They did the first. It was, I think, only $270,000 outcomes funding. So tiny project, actually. But because they showed success and they showed measurable outcomes after 3 years, in learning for really marginalized girl groups, on the back of that, on the back of the transformation also that the organization went through that, because for NGOs, even good ones, they tell me, who've been on the receiving end of these contracts, they tell me it transformed completely the way they work, because suddenly they're much more data-driven, they're much more performance-driven, they have much more flexibility to do what they need to do. They don't have to write a budget line for 3 years and can only change 10% of budget line. If after 6 months they discover that what they're doing doesn't make sense, they can change all of it without having to go back to the donor and to ask them about it. It's like a dream, actually, because you have an investor who is working with you, who gives you the money, doesn't ask you about every coffee cup, but asks you to achieve the outcome. So in a way, it's easier and harder. But back to Educate Girls example, on the back end of that success of that actually quite small project, they've raised commitments of $100 million.
Wow.
That tells you everything. So there is also, I don't want to say hype, but the whole world is watching this now. So if you are an NGO and you want to transform your organization to deliver better, and you want to transform your organization to attract much more funding, do one of these. It will be transformational.
So you'll be pleased to know that I sit on the advisory council of Educate Girls as well. So I'm a big fan of Safina and their work. Tell me, in terms of this question, because this is often also asked, in terms of, especially in this post-COVID world where there's been a focus on equity and equality and making sure that no one is left behind. How does your model ensure that vulnerable children aren't left behind?
3 answer quick ones. One, we actually only work with vulnerable children. Like, we see ourselves as a last mile fund, so we wouldn't work with, anyway, well-off children or well-off communities. So that's one. But even within that kind of marginalized, community, we have developed kind of a new model, which we call multipliers. So we can pay more for a girl, we can pay more for a child with disability. So we can multiply actually the price we pay for outcomes. And the third piece, we also sometimes just strategically go, let's say an outcomes fund that is specifically for girls' education, or for refugee children or something like that. So there are 3 levels how we can navigate that.
Well, wonderful. Amel, there's some questions that have come in, and I was wondering whether we can take them. Firstly, I just want to tell you that there's a few people from your country, Tunisia, where you used to serve as tourism minister there. And Wahiba is saying, I'm proud of you. We have people from Greece, from Bangladesh, from the US, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and so this question has come in, which is, there's a comment that this is very true, Amel. Many programs for keeping girls and vulnerable children in school are tied specifically to what the funders want and not always what is actually needed on the ground. Holistic approaches need to be developed from ground up. What do you have to say to that as a response?
But that's exactly actually what we want to do and what we do. So basically we say, I want to achieve this outcome. how you do it, obviously within ethical, boundaries, is I don't care, as long as you achieve it. So I don't care in a sense of look what works in that context. So in a way, you transfer a lot of the power to the ground, but with high accountability, So high accountability and high transparency if this is also achieved. So in a way, you get more freedom to work, but you are also held more accountable for the results.
And so Tom on LinkedIn is asking, how can retail investors get access to impact investment? It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nascent, look, impact investment is much bigger than what we do. There is a huge, it can start from green bonds or investing in B Corps to what we do. If you take a spectrum, we are actually on the extreme of that spectrum. In a sense, we are maybe the most linked to social and, developmental change, linking the money. So, and in that sense, we've attracted, we've been working with UBS, for example, who are developing a fund to invest in these, impact bonds or in these results-based finance models. There are a few commercial investor pension funds who are entering this, but it's still nascent. And I think that what I tell investors, at least, I tell them, don't wait until the product is ready. Be proactive. And I think UBS has been playing this role through their UBS Optimus Foundation, to be honest. Many others could do more, is build the ecosystem with us, because you have the means. We're working with social enterprises and NGOs. Sometimes we don't have many means. We work with governments sometimes where the capacity is always not very high. So you have the means to build this ecosystem in terms of helping with contracts, helping with the mindset shift, helping with the narrative. Not sit and wait and say, okay, I'm waiting here until you bring me a product that is attractive enough, and then I'm going to start to invest. I think that won't work short term. We need all to be building this together.
Thank you, Amel. That was a great, exposition as to what the Education Outcomes Fund is. This week, we also celebrated the Day of the Girl Child. And like you are a parent to 2 girls.
Yeah.
And, as we look to the future, in conclusion, this is the question I want to ask is, what makes you hopeful for education around the world, given the circumstances that we're in?
Yeah. One thing, to be honest, if you look at COVID, it's been devastating for many, many children who didn't have access to learning. I know that almost 90% of the children had their education disturbed, but I think it has 2 positive, like silver linings. So one, I think, is that the role of the teacher. One is much more respect, I think, for the role of the teacher and seeing it as a profession, like a doctor or something that you can't just walk into a room and be a teacher. Yeah. But also kind of a move for the role from, let's say, someone who brings the content to someone who is like a mentor and coach and help understand that content. So that's one thing. And I've seen teachers in my daughter's actually school telling themselves that it was kind of a steep learning curve for them also using online learning. The second piece is technology. And technology is not only high-tech, it can be also radio and television and different form of technology. That I always believe it's not an add-on to learning, it's a core part of learning. And I think COVID has shown that it can be and it should be potentially a core part of learning. So these are kind of 2 trends that I hope will kind of, push education to a new place. And that's why actually we cooperated also with, and the other thing is, you've probably heard of Save Our Future campaign, where it's a collaboration of over 200 players in the global education who are pushing governments all over the world to not de-invest, not invest only money in short-term economic recovery and health, but also in education, because we don't want to lose a whole generation. And the great news, in our first week of the campaign, we had a video, it had 6.4 billion, billion with B views. And it's a campaign that has been really greatly supported. So we're fighting that education stays there, and a lot of people are fighting with us. And the work you've been doing, Vikas, also gives us hope.
You're very kind. Amel, thank you so much for joining me today on this live stream to the T4 audience. Please know that we watch, I'm sure that those that are here watch eagerly about your progress. If they wanted to find out more, where would they go online to see more information about the EOF?
Yeah, we have a LinkedIn account, so the Education Outcomes Fund, so you can follow us there. We have a web page, and we have a blog on our page where we really inform about new developments and what's happening. And you can also sign up for our newsletter on the web page. So please do sign up so we can stay in touch. Yeah.
And Tom says he's obviously been to your LinkedIn account, saying thank you for writing the letter to your daughters. It was a nice read, Amel.
No.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope we get another chance in the future. Thank you for taking part.
Thank you, Vikas. Good evening.
Good evening.